Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Friday, July 17th, 2026. Going up on a Saturday, filmed on a Saturday, and oh man, I'm, running against the clock here for really fortunate reasons for myself. I am prepping to go on vacation on a cruise next week, and I'm just rapidly trying to, finish my reading for the last week, which I stayed up late to try to get through a few books that I definitely didn't want to take with me on vacation. This reading haul I'm going to be talking about, it's kind of a little deathy. It's a little somber, important stuff, but I'm hoping my vacation reads will be a little more lighthearted. But anyway, I'm just going to get into it now and hopefully not ramble on forever as usual. But as usual, I'm going to start by reviewing a short story in a literary journal, although this is actually an anthology called Frankly Feminist, and it's a bind-up of stories that appeared in the Jewish women's magazine Lilith. And what I read this week is called Unveiling, which I'm almost positive, I think it was published in her own personal collection that she published almost 15 years ago or something now, which is like actually right up there. I read and reviewed it years and years ago, so it's been years and years since I read this story, which the unveiling refers to in Judaism, the custom that a year after death you unveil the gravestone. And on another somber note, I was doing a little research into this and I realized that Rosett, the author, just died in 2025 herself, and she was also a writer on Blossom, so Mayim Bialik wrote a nice tribute to her that I'll link down below, and I'll link my review to the collection down below. And so anyway, in this story, it's about a wife who we're coming up on the year of her husband's death of cancer, and she's getting her hair done, and it's kind of like this hodgepodge of her dictating a letter to her dead husband about her feelings and about memories of them and the kids and the illness a little bit. It kind of goes a little in different directions, and then she's also planning for her family to come in for this unveiling and is debating grief. And I think I have a little bit of bias at this story. Didn't work for me as well and felt too fleeting, and there's a few things. I am distracted by my own life, but also I did also read a memoir about this subject that is much more detailed about what grief can feel like. Granted, in this case, it's a tragic situation. The husband died too soon of cancer, but maybe it's not quite as tragic as the next one, so maybe I'm definitely judging this unfairly in a way. I think that it could be like a interesting rumination on what this character could be going through. But a far deeper and more harrowing exploration is in this memoir, When We See You Again, by Rachel Goldberg-Polin, which I started reading last week. This is the sort of thing I actually was rushing to finish it this week, but I feel like it would be better to sit with it more slowly. And I'm sure I could get even more out of it than I did. It's a very raw memoir, not all that polished, I think. But Rachel Goldberg-Polin has become famous in the last few years after October 7th. Her son Hirsch was the only American hostage to be murdered in captivity. And she, before that, was one of the most active, viral people pressing for the release of all the hostages and the end of hostilities. And so this is a book that it jumps around a bit. It jumps about, the experience of right before up to, the last time she saw Hirsch, and some of the action she took to try to get him back, although she uses a lot of sort of vague names like great man or that sort of thing to talk about her dealings with famous people that she doesn't want to name. There is a little bit of cynicism, I think, that she really doesn't think that a lot of people with the most power did enough to help her son and to help the hostages. But that's just part of this memoir. She's also talking about her experience with finding out about his death and the grief of that, and which is very multifaceted and something she's going to be dealing with for the rest of her life. And she goes into much deeper than the short story, the physical repercussions, the psychological, the emotional repercussions of what it is to lose a child. And some of it is understanding that anyone losing a child is horrible and harrowing, and then some of it is also the reality that she lost him to terrorist violence. And so there's a lot here. It was very emotional. I was crying during lunchtime when reading it, maybe a questionable decision about when to read chapters of this book. And then I was trying to, finally get through the rest of it before my own vacation that I'm lucky enough to be able to disengage from this tragedy in a way, obviously, Goldberg-Polin as a mother of a victim cannot. But yeah, I think it's a really important book. It's not maybe the polished writerly book, and part of me thinks I might have put too much on it because she is a thoughtful person in all of her interviews, but she isn't a writer who's necessarily been trained before this. This is just such a unique circumstance. So I may be returning to this book. I'll certainly have to be able to ruminate on a more thorough review, I think, for Goodreads, because this book really deserves a well thought out response, not just me yammering on as I'm trying to prepare for a vacation. Speaking of preparing for a vacation, I read AERIE short stories, although they're really essays, by Liles. I picked this up last year in Bermuda. I went on a cruise to Bermuda last year. I wanted to pick up, some local writing, and now I'm on my way back to another cruise to Bermuda. I'm wondering if I'll be picking up something else at the local bookstore there. But yeah, I actually made an entire video about this. I slotted it into my annual Try a Short Story tag. So I reviewed one short story or essay in here, and then I reviewed the overall collection, which I think there were some really interesting ruminations on. ARIE refers to kind of being in an elevated, distanced point, which might refer to living on an island, which is somewhat removed from the rest of the world. And in some of these essays, she actually goes off to Baltimore, where I was born, to try to make a writing career for herself. And she makes some vague references to her, personal relationships with, partners and children. But I think the most moving ones, there were ones about grappling with her grandfather who disappeared during World War II. There were ones that ruminated on sort of a change in her own affectation from like young adulthood to more older adulthood, and maybe going from somebody who was a bit more of a partier to somebody who was a little more conservative or quiet, or there was a really great essay about sound in here, like for people like me and her, I guess, who are sensitive to a lot of sound and sort of how to approach that. And she just had some really evocative imagery and description of the senses in these books, in these essays. And so, yeah, I thought, I'm always grateful. There is always a little bit of an unpolished element in a lot of self-published works. But I'm grateful that, it does give me the chance to see something that, you don't get to see maybe so much in traditional publishing. Kind of maybe a quieter perspective, a little less catered towards, climaxes and drama. And yeah, I'm glad that I read this. Next, I read Berlin Atomized by Julia Kornberg. This was my Buzzwordathon pick for July, and I didn't fully get on with this book, although it kind of has some sort of somber death feels to it as well. It's a book that starts like around the 2010s, and then it goes into a dystopian future. And it seems to kind of be following trends of society sort of breaking apart based on political fractures and the idea of revolution. And we're following these characters who are rich, perhaps, unsympathetic to a certain degree, kids in Argentina and Buenos Aires in like the early part, and then they travel to other parts of the world and experience some more debilitating horrors, including one section that I think I was more invested in than a lot, in Gaza, where the main character, Nina's brother, it's a Jewish family, and he goes to Israel And he ultimately ends up joining the IDF and dying in a conflict in Gaza. I believe this was written before the the post-October 7th realities. And even now I'm getting a little more distant from it, but there's just a lot of rumination on identity and on loss of family members and on Jewish culture and heritage that spoke to me in here, where there's a lot of just grappling with, the various realities of how to handle such a fraught conflict. And then there's another section in sort of the near future in Paris, where Paris is, in this world, there's increased political violence that really shakes the city to its core, and it has this sort of dystopian feel to it after a while about everyone feeling impacted by the violence and wondering about survival. And I have to admit, I think I might be kind of influenced in my head, because at this point Nina's part of a band. There's a lot of musical references in these stories. And I'm also watching The Vampire Lestat right now, which is also about a band that's sort of heralding in sort of a post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic event, I suppose. Like in the Anne Rice books, there's the Queen Akasha, who causes all sorts of mischief. Anyway, so there were these like images that kind of stuck with me, but there were a lot of stories that just, I felt like the characters and the situations weren't well developed enough for me, and it just had a lot of trouble holding my attention overall, so this one wasn't my fave. And finally, I'm listening to The Kingdom of Almonds by Ariel Kaplan. This is the third, I believe, final book in her fantasy series. I think it's called The Mirror Cycle, something like that. Anyway, I'm in early days with this audiobook. I'm looking forward to bringing it onto the cruise. And this is a sort of portal fantasy where there's a world that's kind of based on our world, but also isn't our world, and then there's a world of magic. And our main characters travel between the worlds during the Inquisition, when the Jews are forced to leave Spain. So Toba is our main character, who actually finds out that she is half Mazic, half magical, and she becomes embroiled in the politics of the Mazics, which also influence the realities of the non-magical world. But actually in book one she dies, but not before making a Buchuk, which is like a sort of a body double clone that becomes a sort of real character stand-in called Toba Bet, who kind of becomes the main character in her stead. But in book three, suddenly Toba is back, like she was in, The Void, disintegrating, but it seems like she's been able to come back to life in maybe the most Jewish way possible, where she argues with angels about the fact that she should be allowed to come back to life. So, I mean, to explain, there's quotes in Jewish sources about Jewish scholars vociferously arguing with God and arguing with higher beings about, whatever they want to argue about. There's a lot of points to argue about in Jewish sources. And sometimes the people win, the scholars win, and that's usually when God is the most proud of us. So I feel like, if you go into a Jewish study session, there is an argumentative attitude about it, where people study in groups and they're meant to challenge each other a bit on the meanings of certain texts. So anyway, I thought that was amusing. It amused me anyway, and I'm excited that Toba, she's an altered character. She's not Toba anymore, actually, after this chapter, but she's back in the story, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this ends. I'll be reporting back. Anyway, that about covers it for me now. So yeah, I'll be leaving links to the Try a Story tag and some information on the Rosett short story and information down below. I went ahead and I last weekend filmed a couple of videos that I intend to schedule for a couple of times upcoming in the next week, so I'm not leaving you completely high and dry until I get back. So expect to see me back on this channel in the next couple of days with my latest mock reads video, which is my response to the Goodreads Choice Awards in an attempt to put some front list on my TBR, and I'm particularly looking at some science fiction releases from 2026 that have caught my fancy. So stay tuned for that. I hope all of you are enjoying your summer, and that maybe you'll have some vacations coming up, and hopefully you'll be able to squeeze some reading in and squeeze some fun in. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time.